Welcome to the open faith discussion here at Talk of Christ, Faith, Family, and Adventure. My name is Steve Hunt, and I'm joined by our panelists. Today, we are responding to a Mormonism Live podcast, which just recently came out, that was called President Nelson's Flight of Death. Is that right? Did I get the title right? And in that podcast, they examined a story that President Nelson has told several times, both over the pulpit and in his books, and it's been published elsewhere, and it's been published by the church in videos discussing faith and so on. And so this story's been retold, and in my view, it's something that apparently kind of defines President Nelson to himself in some ways. He really likes this story. It reflects something important to him. And so he's shared it with us, this story of him, as he tells it, flying from, we learn essentially from Salt Lake City to St. George in a small commuter craft. This was back in the 70s. Am I getting the date right here? Yeah, 76. And that there was some engine trouble. And then, he tells about the plane kind of being out of control and spiraling down towards the earth, and then being saved at the last moment and landing in a field or whatever. And then he talks about how during that flight, he reflected on his life and how, because he was sealed to his spouse, because of his faith in Christ, that he was prepared to meet his maker. Whereas there was another person on the plane who seemed to be in hysterics, very scared of the possibility of dying. And so the story talks about how, because we have, I think what his point is that because we have the gospel, because we have faith, because we have these covenants, we can rest peacefully or be assured of, life to come. And so that's the story. And then in this Mormonism Live podcast, they question whether any of this story, or whether most of the story, is true, or whether it's been highly embellished or fabricated in some ways by President Nelson over the years, because they've done some research that they allege that the flight, they found what they think is the flight. There was a commuter craft flight back at that time that had some engine trouble, but it was only a precautionary landing, apparently, that the plane took, landing in Delta, Utah, on a municipal airport landing strip, not in a farmer's field. There was no fire, no explosion, no oil on the plane. There was no death spiral. There was no emergency landing. And all of those things are claimed by President Nelson and by others who are retelling President Nelson's story. And so the idea is that maybe this was a very uneventful flight, and President Nelson made up most of the scariness, the miracles. And so they kind of put towards the end, especially at the end of their episode, they quote President Nelson saying that prophets and apostles, the leaders of the church, teach the truth. They tell the truth. And yet here he is allegedly making up a story. And so we get to this kind of question that we have to ask ourselves: is this okay? What do we think about the possibility that President Nelson is making up a story? Can we believe what the prophets and apostles tell us? Can we believe them when they tell us about God? If we catch them in a potential lie like this, a story that never happened, can we believe them when they tell us, as Joseph Smith did, that they actually saw God, and so on and so forth? And so that's the episode we're responding to here on this panel. I want to give a little bit of my own response here, then invite others to participate. But I want to start with this last part of the podcast first, this idea where they end it on, let's replay this clip that they played previously in the podcast of President Nelson saying, prophets teach the truth. And let's focus on this idea that will apparently, allegedly, and we don't know one way or the other, and we're not here in this panel to debate whether or not President Nelson was telling the truth or not. We don't have any additional evidence to share. We're just responding to the podcast and this possible idea that he might not have been. And so if President Nelson says prophets teach the truth and then tells a story that, let's assume for a second, is highly embellished and mostly fictional. Is that a problem? And clearly to the Mormonism Live podcast people, it was. And I'm just going to start from that last point in the thing and say, I'm not so certain that it's such a huge deal that we have to focus on this idea that when a prophet tells a story that is clearly intended to be a story of when death is near and you see it coming, because you have the gospel and because you have Christ and because you have covenants, you can be at peace. And that's the purpose of the story. And that purpose still stands, whether he was telling a story that he believes to be real, but it's not, whether he was telling a story that he knows isn't fully real. Anyway, I feel like, and then lastly, I want to say, I'm not sure that it's proven that just because it didn't happen exactly the way President Nelson describes it, that it didn't happen in his mind exactly the way he describes it, and that he hasn't relived that. So those are some of my thoughts, and I'm going to toss this out there now to everybody else to respond to the episode and to the events. And what do you think about this idea that prophets do prophets need to tell perfectly truthful stories every time? Thanks for holding for 1 second here. One more thing is, they mentioned in their episode that Mormons don't believe their prophets and apostles are infallible. We know that our prophets and apostles make mistakes and that they're just men. And then the entire episode seems to be on this, but if they're not telling 100% the truth, how can we trust them? Which essentially, in my mind, is, well, we know that they're not infallible, but they have to be infallible or we can't believe them. That seems to be the standard that they've set up here. We've caught them in an evidence. So, okay.
You may be equivocating a bit on the definition of infallible, because I think most LDS people would agree that, it's not a problem for a prophet or an apostle to have an errant, angry thought, or to, whatever, like commit some sin where by omission or by, like I said, having a thought or a sharp word or something like that. It's a different kind of problem if their credibility is called into question. So, in courtrooms, for example, you're not allowed to bring up certain prior criminal acts of witnesses or defendants, because those would simply prejudice the jury and be irrelevant. But you can almost always bring up prior crimes of deception that a witness, in order to impeach the credibility of a witness. So that's the difference that I would say between saying, we don't require these men to be infallible, but credibility is kind of different. And we don't certainly, an intentional lie is a major problem, I think. The three things that I wanted to say about this, and then I'll be quiet for a while, are, first of all, allegedly, right? There's been an allegation that this did not happen exactly as President Nelson has told the story over and over. And I'll just note, personal reference here, I was on my mission in Buenos Aires in 2001 to 2003, and President Nelson was the apostle that came and visited us while I was on my mission. He gave a big conference, and he gave a speech, and he told this story in his speech. And I remembered it from back then. And I've remembered it when he's retold it. So I think you're right, Stephen, that he does see this incident, whatever happened, as central to his own identity and as an epiphany, a spiritual epiphany for him. I also agree with you that the point of the story is that he noted that he was calm. That's the point of the story. You said that he was saved in the last minute. I don't think that the rescue or the miracle of the plane being able to land safely or whatever is the point of his story. I don't think he's ever emphasized that. The point of emphasis has always been that he felt in that moment where he felt that he was in peril, he felt calm. That was the point of his story. And so it's kind of weird, because actually none of these points of embellishment or alleged embellishment really disturb the point of that story at all. They make it a little bit, I guess, more impactful to say, oh, look how close to death, he was if the engine exploded and they had to land in a field, etc. But the fact is, if nothing at all had happened, but there was some, malfunction with the wiring to where in the plane it started some kind of alarm, but actually there was no peril at all, he could still have had the same epiphany, right? Even if he wasn't close to death, he could have realized, thinking he was close to death, and yet I'm calm. And he could have retold that story. And of course, I'm not excusing any embellishment if there is any. I'm just saying it's interesting because it actually doesn't change the point of the story at all. The next thing that I was going to say is, if the details of this story are incorrect or untrue, there could be many explanations for that. And I'm not going out of my way here to excuse inaccuracies, but you do have to consider a few things. One is 1970s, you said this happened. That, I wasn't even born yet. So it may be difficult to remember certain details. Of course, he does, as we've said, think that this incident was central to his spiritual identity. And so he's likely to remember it well. But put that to one side. That's one possible explanation. A second one is that he, as you said, he thought he saw something that he didn't actually see, or that he perceived it in a way and from a perspective or point of view.
As a side note, I've mentioned to this group on kind of a back channel that I work for an airline, but a layperson, and I fly all the time. And in fact, I take that flight all the time from Salt Lake to St. George. And a layperson in a small plane would, if a pilot turned around and said, we're having a little bit of engine trouble, no big deal, just precautionary. We're going to set the plane down in Delta. We're just going to check it out. We don't think there's any problems. Most people, I think really most people in their brains would be freaking out, would think, oh my gosh, what's going on? The engine are we going to die? They would literally be asking, are we going to die? And if they so much as heard a stutter in the engine or saw a spark, it would become the engine totally shut down and there was a flame by the time they 10 times, had told the story for many people.
That's true. That's a good point. So there's just fading memory as a potential explanation, although not a good one. I agree. And then there is perspective or a point of view, which could account for some embellishment, unintentional embellishment. And then there's the obvious, well, maybe he just wanted to make the story better. And so he made these details up. You have to accept that possibility. And indeed, that's what's been alleged here. It's hard to know which one of those actually accounts for it. Probably the best of those three explanations is the third, or at least the most, that solves the most problems. It creates other problems.
Well, and real quick on that, whether he wanted to make the story better for his point or to tell a story, or simply because, as we all do when we tell stories about ourselves, people, why were you so afraid? What are you talking about? Well, there was flames. He wants to make the story better, just not maliciously is what I guess I'm getting at.
Yeah.
But it could be simply just so that the story sounds better.
Well, yeah, sure. And that kind of embellishment can creep in gradually over time, so slowly that you may not recognize it creeping in. And if indeed he's been retelling this story for 50 years, it may be unsurprising that it may have evolved a little bit. Anyway, in this case, what's alleged to be a lot of evolution. But the next thing I wanted to talk about is of course, as you mentioned, Stephen, the broader question of, in a religious tradition, do the stories which teach principles need to be true, or can they be fabulistic or otherwise, morality tales or something and be okay? And I think that my answer to that question is fables and morality tales are fine. If something is presented as factually accurate truth, then it should be factually accurate truth. But insofar as any of us can actually recount factually accurate truth, because we're all subjective. But I still think that there is room for the broader question of, so what? All right. Thank you all for coming to my TED Talk. Who's next?
I just want to jump in and say, in researching like this concept or whatever, I came across a few I'll just say this isn't necessarily unique to President Nelson as far as conference talks goes. Like embellishing stories has been kind of a thing in conference for a long time. I don't know if you've ever heard of what happened to Paul H. Dunn. There's a whole book based on him called Lying for the Lord, and he actually got censured and moved to emeritus status as a general authority because he was, I mean, kind of the same thing, but he was just, making up stories left and right about some experience, and people go fact check it. Like he had this thing about winning a baseball thing or something, or like one of his stories was like, this guy had tobacco stains on his hand and they picked me over him, and I can say, therefore praise the Lord that I was able to play in the championship game because I kept the word of wisdom. And then some critical ex-Mormon
war stories or
and they were
something
like,
too.
yeah, they looked it up and they're like, wait a minute, his team didn't even, they were in last place that year, and then the next year they like made it to the second round. He never even went to the final. Like this is just completely made up. And he had all sorts of those. And so,
based on a true story, right?
yeah, based on a true story, as in he played baseball. That's the truth of the story. But like you said, I think, and with him, that's taking it to one extreme. And I think I can't remember the exact story, but Elder Holland also has a story that people were like, wait a minute, that's totally made up. So I think there's a few other factors at play too. And like I'll be overly nice, and then I'll be a little critical as well. I think well, yeah, too, like what you said, like obviously maybe not for Paul H. Dunn, but let's say for this story, they eyewitness testimonies hold a lot less weight in court these days, because we found out that the way memory actually works is when you every time you recall something, you don't have a photographic brain. Like you can't get hypnotized and go back and your brain was the camera that actually remembered all of these things. What happens is every time you remember something, you recreate that actual memory, and so it's going to be different every time you do it. And I myself have told stories. It started out as I knew it was intentionally wrong. Like in high school, I used to make up some funny stories about, I don't remember exactly. I just told some story, but like after a few years of telling it that way, I was like, wait a minute, that actually didn't happen that way.
I'm really interested to know what this story is that you made up in high school.
I'll have to remember, yes, but it was totally made up. But I started to believe it. So there's one thing there, but also I think, like you said, and this is. So in this Lying for the Lord book for Paul H. Dunn, his defense was kind of what you're saying. He's like, well, the thing is I was trying to do was teach gospel principles, and I was trying to, make a nice story. It's like, yeah.
I'm
like
sharing
said,
a parable, but people will get more into the parable if it sounds real and that it happened to me, that's,
it's
I think,
true.
where he
And,
was.
and you are like, let me give you an example of very recent that I experienced, that like the difference between believing something is real and not, and the amount I cared about it. I recently watched this, I don't remember what it's called. There's a series on Netflix about the chess playing girl.
The Queen's Gambit.
Queen's Gambit. Like I thought this whole time, like this is based on a true story. I thought, so I'm watching it and I finished the finale. I'm like, that's amazing. Like that's an awesome story. Like how inspirational. Like this girl in the 60s could raise up to like compete with these national people. And like I'm sure some of it's embellished. So let me look it up. I looked at it, I'm like, oh, it's just made up. That never happened at all. And I remember the feeling of being like, then this story no longer inspires me because it's just a made
And
up
so what if
story.
that's the gospel, Corey?
Did
Right,
you
well,
you throw your chessboard across the room at that point?
I'm not even going to play chess now. Clearly, I can't do it. But I'm just saying the thing for because so I had my nice side, but I think that's the thing. Like for the critics of this story is kind of maybe that's what they're saying with, these, and this is another thing that the church has been accused of a lot, and these are the people that question their very spiritual experience. Because if you had a spiritual experience based on this story that turns out to be a lie, then yeah, that's going to shake your faith. And so I think,
yeah, you're gonna, instead of your chessboard, you're gonna pick up your scriptures and you're gonna chuck them, and you're gonna take your temple recommend and you're gonna rip it up, because this is all just, I thought this was real, and this was this. Right. She didn't do that. Yep.
And so yeah, you can get some of it, but like the other part is like and this is out on like the ex-Mormon Reddits too. It was like for like all those Mormon messages and all the Mormon videos, and like they have like this thing and then like this moving music and all this stuff, and like they're built to make people feel the spirit. Well, apparently it's a patented method called heart cell, which is a product from Bonneville Communications and the advertising agency. That's the name of it for the church. And it's like a patented product. Like, we can sell emotion to people and make them feel a certain way. And that's our product. And the church, is our prime example of what we made it for. And a lot of people are like, what? So the argument is whether or not this feeling is manufactured, or they know how to convey a message in such a way as to invoke the feelings that are real, but they just happen to know how to be good storytellers to get that out of you. So that's one side. But again, if the story's, that's beside the point of a made up story or not. But anyway, I don't know what my point is there, but just saying that's the issue that I think people have with this story. Why people like to your point, Dave, is like, why does it matter? Well, to some people it matters a lot, because it's saying you're manufacturing these things that I'm basing my testimony off of.
Well, absolutely. I mean, and I want to point out, we've mentioned on this channel before the idea, we've asked the question, who among you teaches your children that Santa Claus is real? Which of you, and again, sorry, I should have said spoiler, if your kids are watching, turn them away, but that kind of a thing. Do we always tell our children the truth when we're teaching them lessons? Is everything that we say the truth? And is it a problem if sometimes it isn't? And on the one hand, we're teaching a lesson and we're getting some emotions and some feelings and we're having a great Christmas and whatever. And on the other hand, when they find out that what we told them when they were little wasn't always the truth, how will they react? Does it destroy their faith in us as their parents and in everything we've ever told them? And for some children, that's very possible, and that's a problem.
Well, I'll shut up after this, but like that, I think that's the major crisis of the last 10 years for the church, is the internet coming out and people getting access to the more complicated side of church history, in that it's not the simple narrative that you're taught in Sunday school. Because for some reason, for everybody that you learn in third grade American history and you're like, okay, yeah, that's like the little kid version. And then you go to college and it's complicated. But I think a lot of people accuse the church of being like, well, you only taught us the third grade version of history and never indicated that there was a college level of history that I didn't know about. And so unfortunately, also when they find out about it, since the church didn't craft the message, they get the anti version of that story. And then they go look up the facts and like, this is true. I've been lied to.
I just like to add to that. I feel like it's not that people know the college education is out there, but they know a lot of people that read it leave. And so they stay away from it on purpose. Or I don't know. I was aware that there was church history that I didn't know. I just was afraid to look at it. I don't know if that's true for other members, but
what do you feel about that story?
This group, but
what do you feel the story means to you? And your response. Respond to their video.
Well, so from my point of view, he's a human. And so the story makes complete sense. Like it doesn't bother me. I don't feel like he was malicious, but at the same time, I think it's still problematic for someone who believed like I used to. And obviously we all believe differently. You know how we were talking about, we all have a church of one, and that's fine. But in my current belief, I never listened to stories at conference anticipating that they were going to be embellished and just knowing, oh yeah, they're going to embellish those stories and that's okay. Like that's never how I went into conference. That's never how I looked at the apostles. Like I felt like they were better than average. I felt like understood that they weren't completely 100% perfect, but they were better than average. And so I don't know. And you can, I was thinking about different things, how I would have thought about this. The reports that they were using on Mormonism Live were very short. And so I was like, well, are they leaving out details that would have made more sense why he would have thought it happened like that? Like I was racking my brain, like what would how can he could be defended here? And I don't know, there's a lot of things, like if you're landing in a really tiny airport, I could see how that might look like a field. And there's just all kinds of things that I can, if you're landing early and you don't have the chance to descend at a slower rate, I can see how going down quickly could feel like a nosedive. I don't know. I thought of a lot of different things that make sense for it. At the same time, yeah, from where I'm at, it's problematic for a certain set of believers, I guess, that never question the apostles, and they I don't even want to.
And yet probably only
Yeah,
problematic.
I would say there's a set.
Sorry, I was just going to say, yeah, probably only problematic for those who never question until now, and now they're suddenly questioning. Like, if they never question, then when they hear this, they're also not going to question. It's not going to, they're just going to be like, as I think they said in the Mormonism Live podcast, there was a caller who called in and said that this isn't going to make a big difference to anybody. If you're a true blue, Mormon believing member, you're going to shrug it off. And if you're already doubting, and then you're going to say, this just seals the deal for me or whatever. And it doesn't sway anyone one way or the other. So, but anyway, back to what you were saying about that.
Well, that's kind of where I'm getting at. Like, I do think, I feel like it's a problem to a certain to a certain way that certain, how do I word this? This story does not align with my previous belief. Does that make sense? Like, this story could not have happened and me just give him a pass. It really would have been a problem. And what probably would have happened is I would have updated my belief with this knowledge that he is susceptible to embellishing stories. And so my thing is, I wish leadership in the church and stuff would be more transparent with how human the 15 are and the prophet is. Like, if they would be more transparent, then you wouldn't have this set of believers surprised to know, oh, he is susceptible to embellishing just like all of us are. They would understand, oh, he's not immune to these human flaws that we all have. And it's, I don't know if that makes sense.
That makes sense. I guess the question is, like, what more would you expect? Because back to when Corey mentioned, right, this happened with Jeffrey R. Holland. And he came back and he retracted. He's like, I'm sorry. We've tracked it down. It turns out the story is not true. That's my bad. And like, so opportunities have presented themselves, but is there an expectation of being like, all right, I'm going to share a story. Now this might be embellished a bit. I don't have the best memory, and I polished this up so it sounds really good. So just be prepared for that. Or like, what would you like to see there?
As far as transparency, I think it's kind of the language around, they say that they're a special witness, right? Usually they say, and what does that mean? Like, what does it mean to be a special witness? Like, just that they have that calling, or are they special? Or is it just the calling special? And that's never really, I don't know. I think you do have some lessons that will let you know about that, but I really don't know how to describe it. Like, there's just people that think they're having supernatural experiences in the temple. And even, I think there is a story of one of the prophets, is it one of Joseph Fielding Smith, that had a story about seeing Jesus in the temple. I remember hearing that, but maybe it was
Also seeing Satan outside of the temple.
I think it's like a fine line for a lot of them to, and I think they're actually, I think more on the latter end of a transition, but I think there has been a big transition, and like I said, even the last, since maybe Gordon B. Hinckley, I think there's been a transition of trying to be more transparent about that. And I know some apostles have been more vocal about emphasizing that they're, hey, we're just men, but like, it's hard because, like, to maintain any status as a leader, you also need to invoke the trust of the people. So it's like, how much do we give and take? When I was on my mission in Ukraine, Elder at the time Nelson was the area general authority over that section of the world, and he came to speak to us, and there was a question and answer thing, and one of the Ukrainian members raised his hand, and he was like, hey, and he roundaboutly tried to ask him, have you seen Jesus, basically. And Elder Nelson kind of skirted it because it wasn't exactly direct question, but then he's like, he grabbed back the mic, and that guy wasn't gonna, he was like, no. He's like, let me ask this. Have you seen the Savior with your eyes in a vision or anything like that? And he had to try to answer the question. I don't know, maybe he has since, but the answer he gave would not be, if you were that kind of member that like was going about thinking like every time they go meet in the Holy of Holies or whatever, they're all seeing Jesus all the time. his answer would not have been satisfactory, because he said something about, like, do you have to see with your eyes to be able to see? Like, I have a testimony of him. And so, like, it was just about, like, and I remember even me I was a missionary at the time, I'm like, so you haven't.
So no.
Yeah, so no. I mean, that's fine. It's just, can we just say it? But I think, that's the whole balance of the church right now, is like,
Yeah,
I think they're trying to
couldn't.
talk to two audiences. They're trying to be like a two, I don't know what that phrase is, but they're talking out two sides of their mouths. Like, to one people, they're trying to, like, still maintain this fragile, very delicate, simple faith, because they don't want to lose that. And I agree there's value, but at the same time, they're trying to be more open and transparent and, like, reveal all that. But it's hard for them to know, if you tip the scale too far one end, you lose all these people. But if you don't address this at all, then you lose all these people. So they don't know what to do.
Yeah, I don't know why if his answer was no, which we don't know, but if his answer was no, I don't know why he didn't just say no. Would that have been such a problem?
Special witness of Jesus Christ. If you're telling people
well, and
that,
so
then that has to
what
mean
you're
something.
saying is, what you're saying then is that the brethren are aware that the title special witness is understood by some church members to mean visual witness and, an eyewitness. And so because they don't want to disturb the faith of those members, even though they apparently, if we are playing this out with him having the answer of no, even though they apparently know that's not what that means. I don't know why they wouldn't just clarify that, if that's not what that means, and they know that's not what that means. But I still think that we're underselling the importance of, this was a peripheral point in his story, right? I mean, if he said, yesterday I was in the Arctic and I was lost and I prayed and, the heavens opened and teleported me to Utah. And he said that, and everybody was like, well, no, I mean, that didn't happen. That would be a major problem, right? Because there's a whole lot of sliding scales, right? One is, how long ago are you saying that this, alleged event happened? Two is, how central to your point is the miracle that's in this alleged event? Three is, you're hoping that people then base their faith on that event. So, it seems like saying, well, in the 70s, I thought I was going to die and I was peaceful, is just scores really low on all of those relevant metrics. And that's why it seems to me that, if the embellishment is regarding how much peril the plane was in, it kind of doesn't matter that much, because those three metrics, which I'm sure we could identify more that are relevant and important, but those three metrics of, like, how long ago, how central was the miracle, and how much can people base their faith on what you're saying, those are all really low in this story. Where certainly you could imagine stories where it would be much higher. And if those were found to be false, would be devastating, I think, to the faith of a lot of people. So I think you have to consider, what kind of story is it and what's the point of it? And to simply just say, oh, one of the brethren or even the prophet has told a story which we found has factual inaccuracies, is by itself not that much of a problem.
Can you take a direct line?
More, right?
Can you take a direct line from that statement? One of the brethren, even the prophet, has told us a story that has factual inaccuracies, and therefore we draw a direct line to, now we can't trust what the prophets and apostles tell us.
Right. So this whole thing's a hoax, right?
And this is where I want to hop in and give my take on it, right? Because this is where it comes out, is to, like, these embellishments, is he knowingly putting those in there? Or is this something that just kind of happened gradually? We talk about,
and that's another metric I'll point out, that there's probably 10 more that matter that I haven't identified, but certainly how knowingly is the embellishment or alleged embellishment is certainly relevant. Go ahead, Jake. Sorry.
Sure. Yeah. So first thing I want to bring up is during my time as a police officer, right? I was a police officer for 3 years, and a big part of police work are witnesses, finding out what happened. And what was really eye-opening is how inconsistent witnesses are, not even years after the fact. Because I have to get the year right. I think they said like the first time he came out publicly, it was in an autobiography that he said that this event inspired him to write. And that was like in 82 or something. And so not that long after the fact, still years after the fact. But like some people would point back and be like, well, you see, it wasn't that long after. But I would have within minutes or even hours of an incident coming in, talking to different people and getting a lot of different perspectives on it. What also was very interesting is, myself as an officer, when I was on afternoon shift, it was you come in and it was really busy. It was call to call to call. It was, we had a theft at Walmart and straight from that to a domestic. And then we go from there and now we have another, someone was at the liquor store and was trying to do something like that. And then another domestic and another domestic. And so I have the little notes that I take down on my pad. When I came down, and then usually the latter half of an afternoon shift would just be me sitting down and writing reports for all of these. And I go back to the first domestic of the day, and I'm sitting there thinking like, okay, I've got the main facts down, but the little in between, I didn't know 100%, right? And it's kind of concerning that can happen as a police officer, but like I got the main facts down, I know what happened, but my brain had to come in and try and fill in the rest, because when you're sitting down writing a report, you have to write down what happened. And there was a lot more than what I was able to write down in my little notebook when I was on the scene. And that's just within one day towards the end. And obviously there's a lot of events there that are a lot more significant than what you'd have in a day-to-day person's life, right? And this type of an event with this airplane would be of course significant.
And you're recording, what you've heard and not necessarily what you experienced. So we would hope that the memories of somebody who's actually experienced the event would remember those little things better than the police officer who just listened to them get told.
But he's recording his experience investigating.
Yeah.
And I think that I think the pushback, the obvious pushback, Jake, is, well, sure, but that was all in a day's work. This was almost dying in a plane crash. You remember this, that's the pushback. But I think that, your point's well taken. The fallibility of memory is not up for debate. Everybody agrees memory's fallible. They get worse over time. And
not just
how important an event was to you, it will evolve in your memory over time. I think that's.
And I think that's not the only point Jacob was making about the foul. He was also making that each individual person who participated had a completely different memory about it. From a different viewpoint, it comes out differently. And so if you could talk to the other people who were on President Nelson's plane, some of them might tell the story completely differently, and they would influence each other. And so as I proposed, there's this possibility that when they landed in Delta, that the 3 or 4 of them on the plane who don't know much about planes and engines and whatever were going, did you hear the engine? It sputtered. Oh, I heard it. I saw a spark. I was looking out and I know the engine was having trouble. And even though President Nelson may not have seen the spark, to hear one other person say, I thought I saw a spark, President Nelson's memory could suddenly be influenced to be thinking there were flames.
Of course.
Anyway.
No, part of police procedure is witness isolation. When you get there, you separate everyone so they don't get in there and influence. You want to get what their experience of it was, knowing that it's going to be different every time. But like you said, if I didn't see anything, but we're all over here talking about what just happened. Did you see that? Yeah, that guy threw the punch. Yeah, and like 5 teeth went flowing out as soon as he punched him. Now everyone's thinking there's teeth flying out there. When in reality, we get there's no teeth anywhere. Yeah, maybe he got hit. He's bleeding from his mouth, but no teeth went out there. But that was their experience down there. Like, yeah. What's also interesting is preparing for court sometimes and things like that. I would read my case, but I also read other cases, the other reports from other officers. And it was this weird. Not always when I'm going to court. Sorry.
That's
okay. Go ahead.
We're gonna have to
just get myself or even cases that I wasn't a part of. Right, I'd pull them up and I'd read things, and I'd say like, okay, this is interesting because like I thought that I experienced that. This is what that person experienced. And my mind
that's called tainted testimony at that point.
Right. Sorry. No, I should go back. It's not cases that I was going into court on. It's
okay.
No, like if I came into a shift and they're like, hey, this burglary or something like that happened last night, I would go in and I'd look up the report if I had time and be like, oh, okay, what happened there?
Sure.
But later.
Just curiosity then.
Yeah. But like over time, like even now, remembering back, sometimes I can be like, oh, I remember this big case that happened in Sandy, and be like, no, I actually wasn't a part of that. But I read through someone's case and it was written in the first person, and like my mind created that story. And I can go back, and if I like, I could picture myself there.
That's crazy.
If I'm not careful, I could be like, yeah, I was part of that case. Right. One of them I remember reading in particular was this, this murder that happened. It was a mentally unstable individual, thought that the government was telling them to kill their parents. And so they took a golf club. And I have this vivid picture in my mind of what it looked like when I was reading it, almost like I was there. It wasn't there. I wasn't actually there. But I could see how, especially over time, telling something over and over again, things that were based on some sort of event and possibly having input from other people could creep in there, right? I'm not saying this is what happened, but these are things you have to take into consideration if you're going to question someone's credibility on retelling a story that, right? They're not even saying it was completely fabricated. They're saying some pretty big things are fabricated. But again, with your experience, Dave, in particular, you probably hear all sorts of things. Are like, yeah, that's completely different than what these other people are saying. And so these things can creep in there. One other thing I wanted to bring up is we kind of mentioned before are parables. And this is getting to like the truth of the matter, right? What exactly is Elder Nelson or President Nelson at this point trying to teach with this? Is it this factual truth? Is he trying to tell us a nice story to give us the facts of what happened on this day in 1976? Or is he trying to teach more of a spiritual truth? And that maybe he's not as, maybe he's playing a little loose with some of the facts as he remembered them, just like, this is what happened. But like you were saying, the center of his message isn't, I was involved in a plane crash or a potential plane crash, and then it brought to me this event where I was calm and I was so happy because I was reassured. That's the center.
But again, what if you're an investigator that happened to be invited by the missionaries to watch conference that day, and you heard that story, and it gave you the spiritual confirmation during that you joined the church off that, and then later you find this out?
Well, first of all,
does that make it okay?
An investigator. I thought you were talking about like a plane crash investigator.
Yeah. Him too.
So the question is, and this can go to Jesus' parables. He teaches, what if I'm converted because of a story that's about a man that goes and sows a bunch of tares among wheat and then it grows up? Did that actually happen? No. Maybe it did something, but I'm not sure that Jesus was retelling an event that he was looking at.
They seem to know they were parables, though, right?
They were presented as parables. I mean, I think when Jesus says, a certain man had two sons, it's like, okay,
like they know that's being set up for a parable, but what I'm talking about is the experience, right? He had an experience based on something that didn't actually happen, right? It's a story that was being told. And so based on the experience from the investigator, you still had an experience that led you to God, whether there were inaccuracies in there or not, right? And this is where, okay, the focus should probably go back to what was the intent? If the intent is purposefully Elder Nelson coming in and be like, how can I spice this up? I would say that's ill intent, right? And it's like, yeah, you're trying to make this something more than it is purposefully. And this would be, where Paul H. Dunn is going wrong. And it was like, yeah, you're not supposed to play things up for the greater good and put in things that aren't accurate on purpose. But if these things are coming in there as because of the frailties of memory over time, sure, and how these things come about, I have a hard time assigning. So,
yeah, where are we? What then is the kind of how do we evaluate the words of prophets and apostles, and more specifically the first vision, for example, when we have multiple versions of the first vision and they don't 100% coincide, and we have multiple tellings that Joseph Smith made over many years in a very similar fashion. I think that the historians agree that early on, Joseph Smith, as he told the story, talked about his first vision as being something kind of between him and God, and just something where he was trying to figure out his standing before God and whether he'd been forgiven of his sins. And it didn't seem to him at that moment to be this huge, amazing, God has revealed himself again, and now the restoration has begun, and so the church will come forth. Like I don't know, as a 14-year-old boy, that he felt like he was being called to be the prophet of the restoration. That all came about in later tellings where he realized, this was a big deal. you know.
Well,
But the question
but
is,
that's again, we've had a whole episode on this, and that's not to say that that we don't need to rehash our episode, except to say that the fact that the story changed doesn't mean that it's not true. That we've talked about that today. We've talked about that in that episode. The pushback on this is, how far do you give a pass to inconsistencies where somebody is purporting to be a truth teller, and that's their function? How much of a pass do you give where somebody is purporting to tell you spiritual truths, where you can see that there are hallmarks of inconsistencies and things like that, which can only be explained so far because of the frailties of memory. I think the question there is, well, there's going to be people on both extremes, and then there's going to be this giant mean in the middle where most people get to decide whether this is a problem for them or not. And certainly, I think that you're going to consider, whether consciously or unconsciously, the kinds of metrics that we've talked about, right, in making that determination. And somewhere you'll make some kind of visceral determination that this is a problem for you or it isn't. And if you were an investigator who had their first spiritual experience, quote unquote, because of hearing this story, I would hope that you can ask God directly whether or not this is a problem for you and whether this invalidates your spiritual experience. And if it does, then it does. And you've got to follow your conscience on that. And if you say, look, I can go here and no further, I get it. And so somebody earlier said, this isn't going to really have an effect one way or the other. I disagree. I think that there will be a small number, but there will be some people for whom this is one bridge too far. And I get it. It's okay. Those people are, in my view, in my theology, they're beloved spirit children of God. And so he's going to watch out for them. He's going to find them in one way or another, just like he finds me in one way or another, whether or not I stay in the church. So,
and I have a similar, theology as far as, God's care and love for each of his children. I think in general, as we all do consider these things, pray about them, study them, try very earnestly to figure out truth, that God is merciful, as we're not going around intentionally trying to deceive other people. We're not going around trying to be malicious about our own beliefs or trying to be evil. We're just trying to figure things out that, yeah, you're going to get some people who will stay in the church and following him, and others who will leave because they feel like that's the right thing to do. And like you were just saying, I feel like that both, as you're doing what is commendable, what you believe to be right, I'm in favor of people doing what they believe to be right.
I would say, though, that I think we're all agreed that if you're in any kind of ministerial role, if you are purporting to talk to people about faith in God, I think it's very important that you try to be as accurate as possible about your own experiences, because it could certainly create a stumbling block later. And so, if this was a mistake, it's fine. People make mistakes. If this was intentional, I think it will have some consequences that are not great. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's important to note two things. One, we've had a long discussion now, essentially accepting as a foregone conclusion that, yeah, this story must be riddled with factual inaccuracies, when in fact that is only alleged and hasn't been proven. So we don't know that. But if in fact the story is inaccurate, I think that it behooves everybody who's interested, member, non-member, whoever cares, to ask themselves, okay, what does this mean for me? What is the implication? And if you need any help with that question and you believe in God or any kind of spiritual direction, try to look inward to that direction and find out which way it points you. But, you have to follow your conscience in the end. Marty, we can't hear you.
Okay, so I mean, you guys already brought the analogy to the first vision. I think if you want to know why it's a problem for members that leave, that you drew the correct analogy there. Because I mean, you talk about the first vision, and someone could wonder, well, what if the thing that God was telling Joseph Smith was that his sins were forgiven and that none of the churches were true? Because honestly, in my journey, that's kind of the conclusion I came to. But then inaccurately, some people placed something like when I learned about the first vision as a believer, that was a testament that there were two beings. It wasn't just one God. There was God the Father and the Son. And so if that was a wrong conclusion because that was a mismemory from Joseph Smith, then you can see like that, like if Joseph seeing God the Father and the Son Jesus Christ was like the flame, you can see why that might be a problem for like the flame in President Nelson's story, right? Like whether the flame was there or not. Like maybe that was an insignificant part of Joseph Smith's actual experience, and he made it to be too much, possibly later down the road, or other people influenced him into a maybe like into a different kind of belief, and then he remembered it later into, you know what I mean? Like, because that's kind of, I think, the argument of many is that there wasn't this belief until later, and that's when it got infused into the story, right? So, and then maybe he remembered it that way, not even in a malicious way, but in a way that he goes, oh, you know what? I think when I had that experience, it was God the Father and the Son Jesus Christ, even though he didn't write it down the first time like that.
You make a really
Anyways.
good point. I want to jump in here for a second because,
Go ahead.
and I haven't gone and researched this myself. This was just according to that Mormonism Live podcast, but they said that in President Nelson's first retelling of this story, the center aspect wasn't, I'm so glad that I'm sealed, and that he was calm. He focused on that my life could have ended that day, and I haven't written my autobiography yet. And he said this was like the springboard for him to write his autobiography. And that, I think that was the 1832 record that he had of it. And then after that, he doesn't really talk about this being a big inspiration for him to write the autobiography because it was already written. And then reflecting back, he says, no, actually, no, I was calm, and it was a reassurance to me that we're sealed. And so I think that's also another parallel that's relevant because, right, there's also this looking at the first vision is like, well, was it just he was looking for forgiveness and he got that? Or was it, all churches are wrong and we need a restoration? So also maybe a reaction to that.
And we do. Each of us, I think, has pivotal moments in our life where we also have an experience, and then I think we define ourselves by those experiences. And those experiences, even though they seem very influential in our life, even at the moment that they happen, yet the way they influence us and the meaning we take from them can change over time. And I mean, I've mentioned to you guys that I have a similar experience in my life that seems to have this huge impact, this idea of helping rescue a young woman who was in trouble near a river. And not to go into a lot of detail, just there were parts of the story that I tell about how we helped this young woman that I think are true. I think it's the way it happened. But, Dave was there that day, and so were my uncles and my father. And
no, I wasn't.
Were you not?
And there you go.
Boom. See, so this was, you were you on your mission then? When was it? Okay. I've got pictures.
Did it even happen?
Did it even happen? I've got pictures from the day of the young woman. That's all I know. And now I'm telling my wife where I got these pictures of this young woman from. No, I'm just kidding. So, what my point is that we have, this is a critical moment in my life, and I remember it a certain way. Other people will absolutely remember it differently. And the meaning that I take from it has very likely shifted over the decade since it happened. And I just think that happens to all of us. And so we can expect it to happen to the men who are prophets and apostles. We can expect their telling to be different. We can expect the meaning they get from the stories in their life to be different. And then as we've talked about here, we all have to decide, how important is it then to us when they tell us that story that had great meaning to them, that we suddenly find out that they didn't actually tell it accurately according to the way the NTSB recorded the event, or accurately, for example, in my case, the search and rescue showed up at a certain point to help rescue this young woman. There is probably a record written down somewhere of that happening. Would it match my telling? I am absolutely certain it would not. My telling has a very spiritual point to the way that I learned that God guides and directs me in my life. It's got nothing to do with what would have been written down by the search and rescue. Marty has asked a question here in the side chat. Marty, you want to read that out loud? Oh, you're muted.
I thought the space bar did it, but it didn't do it. Okay, so we're talking about how these are kind of regular. We're giving President Nelson kind of a pass, right? We're acknowledging that he. Oh no, you guys are all frozen. So maybe
we can hear you. You're good.
I think might be bad.
You're good. So her question says, "What is a prophet?"
Okay, I can't hear you guys. So sorry if it cuts out.
She says, "What is a prophet?"
So we're talking. We're giving him like. Okay. Yeah. So like if we're giving him a pass and saying, well, he's a human and he's a regular person, kind of like us, he has these experiences like us. I'm just wondering, and we're accepting. Yeah. No, if we're accepting that he.
All right. I'm gonna jump in here. Just because I think she's cutting out, but the question is, what is a prophet if they aren't talking to Jesus in a special way? Isn't that the benefit of being a member of this church, that we have prophets and apostles and they lead and guide the church? They talk to Jesus. I'm embellishing her question a little bit. And I don't know that we should probably spend an entire episode on this. But for sure, I just want to, in a direct answer, I personally do think, and this is one of the reasons why, why I have a little bit of a nuanced and a different view. I think we do view and define prophets and apostles and revelators and seers and presidents in ways that are a little bit unhelpful. Because yes, as members of the church, we have this feeling, and we've talked about it here in this video, that a prophet is someone who talks to God, talks to Jesus, gets his direction directly from God and Jesus, is a special witness. Jesus appears in the meeting in the rooms, and the brethren appear to be, what's the word I'm looking for? They condone or they allow that kind of a belief. And yet that isn't the definition of a prophet found in scripture. That's not what we see from prophets in the Old Testament. Yes, occasionally, once in a lifetime, God spoke or said something to them, or they had some experience where they felt they had to go and do something and preach to the people. But generally, a prophet, in my reading of the scriptures, is someone who has received a witness, a revelation that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. That's the spirit of prophecy. And so I'm not saying that's the correct definition. I'm saying that my definition is different than that idea. And so I'm willing to accept that, yes, we have prophets, seers, and revelators. And in fact, there are many prophets. Those of us here on this, who have had personal revelation and received a witness that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, I would argue that you've received revelation through the Holy Ghost, and that makes you a prophet. But we have what President Nelson is. What makes him different is that he is the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He holds the keys of the priesthood, which to me means only he has the right to decide the direction of the church. While I may be, in one respect, a prophet because of my testimony, I am not the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I do not have the right to tell the whole church what we're going to do. Now, I didn't mean to make a discussion out of this. I was giving an example now of another way to look at it, and there may be other ways. And I'm saying, to answer your direct question, so that's how I can stand up and I can say, if I learn that the president of the church has told a story that's not 100% true and accurate, and or I believe the root of your question more is that President Nelson has potentially, maybe, perhaps, never seen Jesus Christ and never talked to him. How is that okay? And my answer to you is, I'm not sure that it was ever a part of my definition of what he had to be.
Not even okay. It's just, I feel like as you start developing your faith and getting to a more adult version of what is acceptable to believe, you kind of drop that and you acknowledge that maybe he is not talking to Jesus. I guess I just wonder, it's interesting to see that kind of be shaved down so much that we're acknowledging that not only is he fallible, but I just wonder, what is it? How is it that God's talking to him in a special way, that just because of his calling? I don't know how to quite describe what I'm trying to say, but that is kind of the problems that this story leads to, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Is it shows that he is a regular person. And so then that breaks into like, well, then he's not a prophet because he's not.
As Corey here says,
to that.
If as Corey asked in the comments here, if he's just another regular guy, then why am I following his commands?
Right.
And absolutely. And that's another video we've talked about, when we talked about the example of, we wake up in the middle of the woods and we want to know whether we follow this guy who claims to know the way or not, or whether, and most of us, again, whether we just go our own way through life or whether we follow somebody who says, I know the way. And most of us do some combination of the two. Most of us don't go our own way all our life, and most of us don't follow someone completely all our life. We have some kind of a mix where we do some things on our own and we do other things to follow other people who we think we can trust. And that's a deep question. We have gone an hour already on this topic, and it is a tough one. I want to thank you for being here. And I think I've said enough of my own thoughts, but maybe we can jot down that we want to have this discussion a little bit further about what this means about the importance of prophets, and can we follow them if they are just regular people and subject to this kind of storytelling and infallibility. So maybe we can discuss going that way next week, unless something else big shows up. So